Morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to COZ session number 30. And we are so glad to have you with us for a wonderful session today. We just want to remind everyone to stay muted. And later on, when we have a discussion, we can unmute. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce two people who've made extraordinary contributions to the world of Yiddish and klezmer music. Professor Mark Slobin and Joshua Waletzky. Mark Slobin is the Winslow-Kaplan Professor of Music Emeritus at Wesleyan University. He's a highly noted ethnomusicologist, a true leader in the field of ethnomusicology, as well as someone who's very well published in a number of areas. It includes music of Afghanistan and many different directions of Jewish music. We're also joined by Joshua Waletzky, who's a filmmaker, singer, and composer, and has had really, truly remarkable contributions to the growth of Yiddish and klezmer music. They're here today to discuss a brand new website called YiddishFolksongs.com, which is an analytical website that's going to tell us a lot more about Yiddish folk song. This is a really rare opportunity for us to learn about this extraordinary website. And I'll turn it over to Mark Slobin. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you, everybody in LA and London. I mean, this is such a treat to be able to talk internationally like this at such ease. And so I'll give you the roadmap. We're going to have 3 segments of our presentation, and then, lots of time for discussion and questions. In the first segment, which will start now, we'll survey this new website, which has only been online like a few months, 3 months or something. We'll do a survey of it and talk about some of the detail of the website. In the second part, I'm going to read most of a paper that I gave about the Yiddish folk song at the last convention of the Society for Ethnomusicology. Because I'm trying to give an overview, an historical overview that might be an interesting way to situate what we're doing. And then I'm going to turn it to Josh, who was going to talk about the current resurgence, upsurge, revitalization of the Yiddish song, which he has been an absolute key player. And so he's going to present some actual new songs, including one of his own, because he's been writing Yiddish folk songs since he was about 15 years old. So he has maybe the longest track record of creativity in this field of anybody going now. So we're going to start. So I'm going to share my screen and put up the website so that you can see what it is. And here is the website, and I'll make this full screen. Okay. Here's the website, and it's just YiddishFolksong.com. And you'll see it has different tabs at the top. If I can move this other thing off there. Okay. This is it. It's housed by the Center for Traditional Music and Dance in New York, which for over 50 years has been encouraging the communities of New York of different groups and backgrounds to present themselves. And so they thought this was a nice way as part of their ongoing Yiddish projects, which have been going for decades. They also do Colombians and Africans and Albanians. They encouraged us to do this. So the team that produced this is the brain trust of the Yiddish folk song today. It's an extraordinary group of people, and who sat around my little studio apartment in New York over a course of about a year or so. And the point of this is to be analytical, as it says. So the Yiddish folk song is now extremely well represented, better than it ever has been in its entire history online, with many archives now available just in the past couple of years. But the writing about the Yiddish folk song remains incredibly poor and meager. There's almost nothing to read about the Yiddish folk song that across its entire history, especially analytical approaches. And what we mean by analytical is to dig into the songs themselves, the music structure, the rhythmic structure, the texts and the interplay of all these elements and the aesthetics of how this comes to be in live embodied tradition. There's almost nothing to read about that, unlike every other European folk song tradition has. I mean, I don't know how many linear feet if you go to Budapest or Bucharest or anywhere and look at the shelves about the analysis of their folk song. So this is the greatest body of European folk song to have zero analytical literature. So that was the point of departure for this. And so I'll just map out quickly what we mean by this. God, I keep having the screen thing at the top there. If I can get, oh, there we go, get that off the bat. Okay, so here's the little about. So this is the team. Michael Alpert, who's well known, I think, to anybody who's viewing. Walter Zev Feldman, likewise. Itzik Gottesman, who is the great folklorist and the great scion of the Schechter family. Ethel Rehm, who started the Center for Traditional Music and Dance, actually, and is, you know, a superb singer of the tradition and grew up with it, Josh and me. So we start with I wrote these framing sections. Oh, wait, let me turn off my phone. Didn't know it was going to start ringing on me like this. Okay. So we start by explaining what we're doing here, and I've written the framing sections here, but you can read those as you will at leisure. So there are the divisions that you can see in the tabs. You just have to, you know, click on. There is the question of what do we mean by a Yiddish folk song anyway? So we have to define that subject. Then there are these sections that analyze the structure of the Yiddish folk song. Mostly, and that's Josh's domain, and he'll talk about it in a minute when I finish this little survey. And he chose to work on the rhythmic structure, which is, of all things, like the least, you know, thought about of anything in the Yiddish folk song. Then we want to present you with a couple of folk singers, and we're adding to this. Oh, I should say that this is a work in progress. This is the first thing that we created and put together. But after that, we are now gathering to admit, you know, and add more materials. So anybody who thinks they have something really new and or new sources about the Yiddish folk song, not anything else, not klezmer, you know, not, you know, cantorio music, but the Yiddish folk song, drop us a line. So we are going to be adding some things as time goes on. So at the present, there are two profiles. There's going to be a third one that Michael Albert is finishing up of actual singers. So, you know, some of these live people, who they were and what their contribution was. And then we want to talk about the aesthetic, and the aesthetic is the folk song in practice, the embodiment. Songs only live when they're sung. But then how are they sung? How do people create performances? How do they judge performances? And particularly important for our times, how do you teach this to other people? So in the aesthetic section, we have two videos of teaching sessions, one by Ethel Rehm and one by Joshua Waletzky. And we talk about the aesthetic issues there. Then under resources, we have a whole bunch of neat stuff. Some things have never been seen before, others that are available elsewhere, which the authors have kindly let us you know, put up here. So that's the survey of the thing. So let me just quickly say, under genre, there is this essay by Zev Feldman, which is the first time anybody has said, all right, what do we, you know, Steitch, was heißt the folk song? The Yiddish word Volkslied is got its own weird semantic field in history. Folk song in English has a very weird semantic history as well. And, you know, we can't deal all of that. So you see the first time I do this, or he does, he puts it in quotes. So what he's going to do here is say, who were the Jews of Eastern Europe and what was their expressive culture? Okay, that's pretty important. What is the general music of the Eastern Ashkenazim? And he lays out categories of that. And he goes through those categories really quickly and talks about the complexity of the Yiddish song and issues like intonatia, which is this wonderful Russian term that's been has been brought into some of our discourse by Izali Ziemcowski, the great folklorist and musicologist and analyst who has done a lot of work on Yiddish song. And he talks about religious song. And then where do we locate the Yiddish folk song? And what we're really dealing with, the heart of the core of this whole thing, is something that we call the lyric song and the ballad. But there are all these other genres of Yiddish songs that we can't avoid because they all overlap with each other. It's an extremely complex field, the Yiddish song. So that's the essay that sets up the whole question of what we're doing. And Josh will talk about his essay. Let me just show you this briefly. So here I talk about how important it is to talk about individual singers. Within Jewish communities in traditional life in Eastern Europe, people recognize excellence. They recognize that so-and-so was a really good singer. And people were proud of being good singers, even though they weren't getting paid for it. You didn't go on a concert stage with it. In their world, they were recognized, both men and women within communities, of being specialists of some kind. So, because of recording and documentation, we only know about a handful of singers because of the vast destruction of this entire, community and all its life, and the complete neglect of this tradition for various reasons we could go into if we have time. We only have like a handful of examples of what I usually call the crumbs from the banquet of Yiddish folk song in this case. So it's a Gottesman talks about his grandmother, Mr. Schechter Widman, and then Bronius Saki in a case study. Here she is with Michael, and Michael is still finishing up his essay. And then we have Toby Bloom-Dobkin, which is an extraordinary, very large study of a single male musician for once, Yitzchak Milstein. And I should all mention, in case you don't know, in the mid-70s, Barbara Kirstenwald-Gimblet, the great scholar, and on many, many things, including Yiddish folklore, got a large grant from National Endowment for Humanities to collect and study the Yiddish folk song. And that was under the auspices of YIVO. And that material has sat gathering dust for 40 years and is now being digitized and put online. The depth of field of that study is beyond anything that anybody ever did in the Yiddish folk song anywhere, because every performance of the people selected, like Mr. Milstein, every single song had a questionnaire that went with it, that went into depth about the context and the biography and the life of that song in the community. And there are a couple of thousand songs maybe. And it's an unparalleled source, which is now, in a very timely way, right now when we have this resurgence, the YIVO Folksong Project, Yiddish Folksong Project, it will be coming online through YIVO. They're digitizing it even as we speak. What Toby did was write an enormous seminar paper for Barbara Kirstenwald-Gimblet about his life. So she very kindly allowed us to put that on there. And so that's another profile. And we're going to be adding some profiles. Hank Kisnetsky is helping us with another profile and so forth. Okay, the aesthetics section really quickly is mostly Ethel Rame's part of this project. And so what we put on was Ethel teaching Eleanor Weil, who lives in New York and came from France and has become a very fine performer of Yiddish folk song and instrumental music. And this is one of those exquisite teaching sessions that Ethel does, and she does them now since about 2010. She's been teaching first at Yiddish Summer Weimar and then at Yiddish New York. And she has also, under grants from New York State Council for the Arts, been a master teacher with an apprentice. So she, intensively works with one person who has been selected as an apprentice, as they call it in the folk arts world. So this is that teaching session. And it's a song also by Lifsha, who we have focused on before. So there's some continuity here. we talk about some of the issues of performance here. And then, and Josh will talk about this more, Josh likes to sing, to teach in groups. So we decided that's great. Let's have a group session that Josh runs, and he can talk more about that. And there's 3 sections to that. He picks again from Gois Dasad, our absolute canonical, iconic, whatever song that is the focus of the first section, the analytical section. Von Gois Dasad is a absolutely classic woman's lyric outpouring song. And it's on the Ruth Rubin album From the Old Country, which is now 60 years old and still the only album of nothing but Yiddish folk singers, an anthology of Yiddish folk singers. There is still no other anthology of Yiddish folk singers album in existence for the last 60 years, which is really kind of unbelievable. So all the songs on there are automatically canonical. And we just love this one so much that we would sit around for 3 hours at a time trying to understand it. That's how complex those songs are, and that's how deep our interest in this material has been. And finally, there's these various resources. Abigail Wood gave us her index of Yiddish songbooks from her dissertation period and her publications. And Zev Feldman and Michael Lukin for Oxford Bibliographies Online produced an amazing bibliography. And Oxford wouldn't let me, of course, put it on, but Lukin very kindly offered an alternative version that isn't the Oxford version. There's also an article by Lukin, which is a very fascinating article. He's one of the really up and coming scholars about the Yiddish folk song. And then we have reports from Barbara's project of what happened in Barbara's project and an example of her questionnaire. And there's an extraordinary essay, which Izali Zamsovsky published in Russian, in which I commissioned a translation for by Gnesin. Mikhail Gnesin was a really important Soviet music educator, bureaucrat, teacher. And in the 1920s, 1926, the last year you could have done that, he wrote a speculative theoretical article, analytical article about the modal system of Jewish music, which Izali framed and published in a Russian journal. And so that is now available for the absolute first time in English for you to read. It's very dense and interesting. We also have our launch party video, which was a long event where we went around like this and each of us talked about the sections of the project and the importance of the project. And we also have the panel. The first panel that started this thing off was a panel at Yiddish New York 2017 that I moderated, where people went around and contributed insights about the idea of the Yiddish folk song. That's where this whole thing really started. We mentioned the Rubin and the Stonehill archives, which are housed at YIVO. So that's the story. And what I'm going to do now is pass this over to Josh to do some introduction to what he's been doing, and I'll stop sharing. Josh, are you muted? You're muted. Josh, you're muted.
There we go.
Ah.
Now I'm unmuted. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I am so pleased to be part of the scholars circle that Mark convenes in his apartment from time to time, and having produced this groundbreaking site on the Yiddish folk song. As Mark was telling us, my history with Yiddish folk song study goes back to the 1975 Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet's YIVO folk song project. And in fact, digging through that material, I discovered that I gave a presentation to the group on rhythm in Yiddish folk song. So in a way, my article on the site about rhythm in Yiddish folk song is a completion of a 50-year study of the subject. And I like to think that that Zev's survey of what is a Yiddish folk song and kind of looking at the different corners of that world looks at roughly 17 decades. And my article on rhythm looks at basically 17 seconds. So it's a very deep dive into the rhythmic structure of Yiddish folk song. And what I'd like to do in just a few minutes is give you a taste of what that is and why it should be interesting to us. I like to trace this part of my interest in the rhythm to some teaching of Yiddish folk song that I did at Yiddish Summer Weimar about 6-7 years ago. And I introduced a concept of different registers of rhythmic structure in the Yiddish folk song, which I called Zogevdik, Zingevdik, and Tanzevdik, meaning roughly what we call parlando or recitative. There's rhythm that's very close to speaking rhythm, so that's why I call it Zogevdik. Zingevdik is not the same as cantabile, but a bit like that, singing like, which means that the rhythm is more symmetrical. It may not be metrical, but it's more symmetrical. And then we get to Tanzevdik, which means dancing like, and there we have more symmetry in the rhythmic structure. And in fact, the song that I was teaching that brought these terms to mind was a song that I recorded for Capella in about 40 years ago, 1979 or 1980. And let me sing a little bit of it, and so that you get an idea of what these terms mean. Rabbi Sai, Chachomim Onashir, ihr will euch fragen, entwert mir alle auf mein Scheile. So that's the way the song begins. It begins in a very spoken rhythm-like way. Rabbi Sai. To notate it, we would have to use fermatas or indications that there's a fluid rhythm. And then it suddenly gets into a pretty dancey kind of rhythm. Entwert mir alle auf mein Scheile. So one thing that I've noticed about rhythm in Yiddish song, and by the way, none of these observations are meant to be exclusive to Yiddish song, and I don't claim that. But there's a very, in many cases, a very quick flow between the different registers. So we could start out in a Zogevdik manner and then jump to a Tanzevdik rhythm, and back and forth as we go along in the song. So when singers are learning Yiddish songs, they tend to get stuck in one rhythm, and they think, well, okay, this is this section. But even from measure to measure, we get a very quick oscillation between different rhythms. So in analyzing the rhythmic structure of Yiddish folk song, I felt the need to introduce this terminology, and I have to say that Yehudit Frigacy, who wrote a wonderful article on the rhythm in liturgical Ashkenazic Jewish prayer, makes a very important point, which is that when we talk about the musical structures in a given tradition, it's a good idea to try to use native terminology, and that's what I tried to do, rather than say, well, it's like some other or some abstract quality that we can assign to it. All right, so that gives you a taste of what the rhythmic structure is, and maybe I'll just give one other short dip into the material. I like to think of the rhythmic structure as being multi-valent or polyvalent, so that we have structures which are not only one thing or only the other thing. And the example that I tried to use in the article is like a pun, like a linguistic pun. So we have the phrase that I used is derlets, derlets. So if you know Yiddish, derlets means the clown, and letzter means last. So if you say those syllables in alternation, you get derlets, derlets, derlets. And it simultaneously means derlets, derlets, the last clown, but also the clown, derlets, derlets. And when we say that, we actually hear, as in a pun, we hear both meanings at the same time. And this is the kind of instrument, measuring tool, or analytical tool that I try to apply to rhythm of Yiddish song in order to dig into the multiple senses of rhythm that that hold the thing together. So that's just a lek and a schmeck. And I think for myself, I have to say that in writing the article, the great surprise and the wonderful surprise was that the symmetry, the structure, the thing that makes it tick as a rhythmic object didn't really become clear to me until the very end of the essay. And in a very short space of music, we see actually quite a complex structure. So it's like a gem which has, you have to look at it very closely to see what makes it tick. And anyway, I invite you all to take this deep dive into the rhythmic structure of that song. Maybe
you want to just play the song briefly? Let's you have this song. We won't go into more analysis, but you ought to hear this song because it's one of the most beautifully satisfying kind of performances we could find. And this song itself exhibited so many of the interesting characteristics of this repertoire of lyric folk song that we were completely taken by. Let me just say, by the way, that Josh, before 1975, was a graduate student doing linguistics, structural linguistics, and wrote actually a seminal article about Yiddish very early on in the game. So, okay, von Geust das Legich offen.
All right, now I have to
You have to share, right.
share. Let's see. Let me get to the screen share part.
Yeah, it's on the bottom
Here
there,
we go.
right?
Okay. And share sound. Yes. So let me.
You could try to
Here
learn
we
it and
go.
sing along while you're.
Whoops.
The variety between from verse to verse, for example, the shifts that she makes, that are very subtle. It's the tiniest things we're interested in. He really just measures milliseconds of of activity on a what we call a molecular level, right?
Right. Okay. Let's see if we're getting this now.
Well, you're not sharing yet.
No. Okay. Hold it. Okay. Let
There
me
you
try
are.
that again. Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
Ist das so leg ihr sich schlafen und meine Hand leg ihr zu Kopens und auf alles hab ich a rote nur auf zurück kann ich nicht haben oh haben zurück kann ich nicht weil meine Hand seinen verbunden als mir soll öffnen mein bitter Herz, zerreusen wollten sich die Wunden. Ach, die Wunden von meinem Herzen, ich kenn sie keinem nicht entdecken, und von mein Leben auszuschreiben, kein Tint und eine Feder wollt nicht kleben. Neub Tint und eine Feder wollt schon ja klecken, dann wollten meine Hände nicht steinen und vor dir mein süß Leben will ich die ganze Welt stradeien. Oi Vater, steh auf von dein Käfer und hör sich zu meinen Neiden, weil durch a Liebe geh ich herum mit, als sie van Arrestant in Keiten. An Arrestanter geht in Keiten, mistomen is doch as wert, und als ich geh in Keiten, mistomen is doch mir von Gott beschert.
So that's 1 minute 38 seconds of pure Yiddish folk. Is a very deeply unhappy song of a woman who's extremely, as many of these are. Okay, I guess we'll leave more for discussion and question and move on because we have two other things to do. I'm going to read part of this paper, as I say, just because I think it presents a point of view on the Yiddish folk song that might be useful for you in some ways. What I'm trying to do here in this talk is do something synchronic, which is kind of what we were doing, as opposed to diachronic. There are two ways to study something. Usually if you study most things, say we're interested in what happened now with the Yiddish song today, which we are. But then it's like, well, this is all brand new or something. And the experiment of this paper is to say, well, what if it's always been the same for the last 100 years, no matter what happened to these people, these Jewish people? So that's called a synchronic approach, where you don't look for the unfolding events existing in a limited time period and ignoring historical antecedents. Okay. I'll skip the introductory section about who the Jews are and all that stuff. And looking over this 100 years of 1920 to 2020, two contexts, I think, two things stood out as constants. One is the fairly stable idea of the internal circulation of singers within communities. Okay? And the other that's more unstable is the movement of bodies from place to place. So those are two issues. So first I'll talk about internal circulation in terms of community life, daily contact with the dense population of Jews, which could be in Brooklyn or it could be, in Yehupitz somewhere. This allows music to move within families, among friends, in peer groups, community singing circles, and can also then be staged in concerts, either of local people or people who were brought to the scene. And that gets us to moving bodies. So I'm going to just talk about two people here in this context, in the older context. One is Mr. Milstein, whom I already mentioned. Yitzchak Milstein, born 1914. Mr. Milstein was interviewed by Toby Bloom Dabkin. His account of his earlier musical life in Szydłowce, Poland, is remarkably detailed, starting with his home, where his musical family would learn songs from each other, using the mandolin as a medium of communication rather than the phonograph. Well, that's a particular family. All families are different. And that was true of my growing up in Detroit. His dad had a songbook, though, too. Okay. And then an uncle brought songs from Warsaw, which had this lively cabaret and theater scene. This is 1920s, 30s. Then there were local songwriters that produced items that circulated in Szydłowce. Mr. Milstein distinguished between songs that were cheap, mere song cobblers, and those who wrote beautiful songs, which might be circulated, for example, by wandering courtyard singers, Häuptsänger. You had, by the way, wandering courtyard singers on the Lower East Side, too. Music at weddings and synagogues rounded out a rich musical life that was added to when the gramophone finally arrived with Jewish and Yiddish songs from America, and not just Yiddish, but mainstream American songs from the 1930s movie musicals. They sang songs made popular by Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald in their 1930s movie operettas, for example. Milstein himself became a mobile musician, learning new material because he used to travel to Warsaw for seasonal work, and then he would bring things back. So this is the idea of people embedded, but also possibly moving. The other person that I mentioned here is Morris Hollander. He's the one that Hank Snetsky did an enormous amount of material with, and who will appear on our website eventually. He came, however, he's a Dorf Yid. This is very unusual, a rural Jew, a village Jew in Ukraine, in the mountain Ukraine. His was a deeply religious family who was responsible for local services. They ran the local services, and they had their own melodies that nobody else had. And then they had a refugee rabbi, this is refugee from the World War I pogrom period, who lived with them, and he brought songs. So even in this remote Jewish settlement that was missing all the richness of Mr. Milstein's life of music, there was internal circulation was still something that was happening, as, for example, this rabbi arriving in town. These two figures who grew up nearly 100 years ago describe patterns of mobility that have not changed in some ways. You can talk to singers today, like Josh, who learned Yiddish songs locally from family or out-of-town visitors, from songbooks, from films, from recordings, and at performance venues. Internal circulation is one of these constants, which is going on even as we speak today. Okay? Now, internet. Take the case of my, going personal, my own mother and my wife. My mom was born in Uman, Ukraine in 1909, and she already had a rich local community music repertoire when she and her family became refugees from the pogroms to Romania in 1920. There, as a Girl Scout, a Hebrew Girl Scout, she learned Zionist songs and Hebrew songs and in Chisinau, which is now Chisinau, capital of Moldova. It was all still within an ethnic network, though. My wife was born in Oranienburg in the Ural Mountains in 1943. She grew up in Chisinau, same place. Her father was from Poland. Her mother and her grandparents were local Bessarabian Jews, so she had different song streams. 50 years apart, both my mother and Greta had brief compulsory encounters with Romanian folklore when local nationalism held sway in the schools. So this was under Stalinism or under Romania of the 1920s. Once the ethnomusicologist Robert Garfias was visiting us, and he was fresh from fieldwork in Romania. He put on a tune from his fieldwork. Greta got up and automatically started dancing the Tropotica, which is a Moldovan folk dance that she didn't even know that she knew. Her body just came up with it. And Garfias was sitting there like, what is this? How do you know? She learned that in elementary school in Chisinau. So this type of experience underscores how individual Jews hold on to diverse sets of music and dance that stream through their lives, even unconsciously, depending on the location and the political shifts. They combine the music of peripatetic family and friends with what they heard also from their non-Jewish neighbors to seed a rich harvest of song. Surprisingly, the kind of move, let's say that Greta made, or my mother, from the periphery to a more central Jewish location, keeps happening. Paulina Shepard, who you know in London, was a spark plug of the London Yiddish music scene, started life in Soviet Tatarstan, in the provincial city of Naberezhny Cholny, in the late 1980s. And she moved then to Kazan, the big city, the capital of Tatarstan, and then she discovered Jewish music and dance. And she got so interested in it, she went to COZ Fest, which was in St. Petersburg, with people like Adrian Cooper and Michael Alpert and all these people who came to teach to the former Soviet world. And she ended up marrying, as you know, the Englishman Merlin Shepard and moving to London in 2003. And so her example of internal circulation from one Jewish milieu to another, first to Kazan, then to Petersburg, and then to London. These are things that have been going on, already been going on for all this previous decades. So Yiddish music, down to a personal level, suggests the snowball model of rolling through history, picking up bits locally, like snowballs do, right? While moving into new zones, sometimes downhill at a very fast rate, sometimes being pushed uphill against the tide of society by powerful forces. Okay? What remains constant is the individual's peripatetic possibilities of dictated solely by what they discover, what their taste is, and I can't overemphasize that enough, and our aesthetic section goes into that, and the long blazing of an individual trail through the forest of signification and social currents. So I do an example from today, and I don't know if Sarah is out there, but Sarah okayed my talking about her life, Sarah Myers, in this paper. She offers a complex example of blending family, local circle, and international travel, and she has a very mobile musical life. So this is about the movement of bodies now and people going around. She was born in 1987, which she says was just at the right time. My parents were interested in klezmer. I grew up dancing and singing. My generation grew up going to folk festivals. People went to class camps, so it's not so strange as you might think if you're thinking about baby boomer parents and their habits. COZ Camp, which was born at the same time as Sarah, actually, ran for 37 years as an influential site of Yiddish music and a cultural activity. She says, I had learned German. My grandmother's from Germany, and my father spoke to her. So this is a family situation then, about the community. I thought I have the German background, some Hebrew background, some familiarity with Slavic languages, so it's time to learn Yiddish. Sarah started singing in Yiddish and was invited to events at the home of the Schechter family in the Bronx. And this brings us to it's a Gottesman and the Lifshter Schechter Widman, material on our website. And that was an important node of learning and transmission in the American context, in New York context, for decades. So mobility still operates at the level of local circles, even though you say, oh, everything's just on the internet now. Some nodes like this are extremely important. They're live. Sarah was embarrassed that she couldn't actually really speak Yiddish, so she took courses in 2012 in New York, and then she lived in Israel, and she found she could learn Yiddish by singing. So I started writing not very good poetry to help learning grammatical things. In the analysis of folk song in general, this is an issue we don't do enough of on the website, and we should do more probably, which is the interplay of text and music. The text, words, and this whole melodic structure that Josh has been talking about are completely independent variables. A text can live without a melody. Melodies can have many texts. And what happens in a song is they're brought together, they're kind of welded. And then once they're in a piece and welded, we don't notice this problem that it's artificial to bring these things together unless you start analyzing and seeing how does the text determine the melody? How does the melody determine the way the text is set? And so forth. So she found that, and then she learned from Ethel Rain, and that changed her whole point of view. So where did she learn from Ethel? In Germany, okay? So we have two mobile Americans who were sharing songs that had traveled from East Europe to the US, and they're in, of all ironic places, Germany, which was not at all the home to this repertoire, but it is today, okay? So this is how history works. And she's been writing new songs in Yiddish. And Josh is going to talk as soon as I'm done here about new songs in Yiddish. That's our third part of our talk. I'm just going to mention one more really interesting player in this kind of what I've set up here. This is a Polish woman, not even Jewish, called Olga Mieleszczuk. She was so taken with Jewish culture that she now lives in Israel, and where she married an Iraqi Jew. And she goes back and forth to Poland to sing Yiddish or Jewish authored songs, which she does beautifully. You can see Olga on YouTube singing 1930s Polish tangos with the absolute fidelity and beauty that you can do with that repertoire. And many of those songs, most of them even, were written by Jewish songwriters. So this attracted her attention. And it's another aspect of this whole folk song thing that moves out. So this is a kind of pendular motion where she's now going from Poland to Israel and back. Pendular motion is very old. Lifsche Sector Widman, to get back to her, was a really, really interesting case. She was born in Swieniecka in 1893. It was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And she picked up German as well as Ukrainian because that was what you did. She emigrated by herself in 1912, okay, to America. And in 1914, she went home for a family visit and got stuck by World War I. Like people get stuck today by COVID, they can't travel again. She got stuck during World War I. She had been in America already and had picked up songs. And she only got back to America in 1951 after surviving the Holocaust. This is extraordinary. So her rich repertoire reflects her mobility and all the kinds of ways that she was able to acquire songs. So, you talk about all these wanderings. I mean, look at Sarah Myers and look at Lifsche. Different wanderings, different purposes, different fates. But, so let me just finish about technology is included in this. Media are flexible and movable like people. Media went from sheet music, older recording formats and radio to streaming and today's universal archive. It's extremely complex to look at any Yiddish folk song even, or any folk song, any American folk song, because what has happened in the conditions of this 100 years from 1820 to today, it's not changed. A given song or tune goes in and out of oral circulation, in and out of print. It is recorded maybe multiple times, and then broadcast, and then relearned by people and retransmitted in other contexts across generations. People lose track of the song origins, and they catch items that appear on their personal radar screens from wherever it comes from, and they don't really care where it comes from or how old it is. This is particularly common in the Yiddish-speaking world because even 100 years ago, the Jews were all literate, whereas the peasants around them were not. So they were enthusiastic about modernization starting in the mid-19th century. So printed sources were, a little different than for the Hungarian peasants. Okay, even 150 years ago, a song could circulate across a huge Jewish network all the way around Eastern Europe within a few months. And then the 78 RPM recordings started as soon as recording started. There were Yiddish songs. And these circulated transatlantically as well. So like Mr. Milstein learned them sitting in a small town in Poland. A song could go viral, like 100 years ago, a song could go viral. Just one thing I'll close with, which I found very amusing, is the Yiddish language version of Fiddler on the Roof. This uses a translation written in the early 1960s in Israel, okay, into Yiddish, of stories written in Yiddish and then turned into an American Broadway book for a show. bringing it back to Yiddish was extraordinary because the original Fiddler on the Roof, as you probably know, Jerome Robbins did not allow a single word of Yiddish to be heard on stage when Fiddler on the Roof was staged because it would bring down the level of the show, okay, in the 1960s. So this mobility, can happen to any kind of musical product, even, composed song, but they're now folk songs. I mean, Sunrise, Sunset is a folk song, and If I Were a Rich Man. So this kind of circulation goes on forever. Okay, so it's about bodies, it's about mobility, it's about technologies and media, and that's I'm going to knock off here so we can get on to Josh's looking at what's actually going on today. So I'm just trying to give you a context for what's going on today. So, Josh.
Okay. Well, we just made it under the wire. I would like to invite Ada Hepko who's with us for another few minutes.
Oh, great.
To introduce, I guess, both the project and your particular song. So Ada, because you just have a couple minutes, should I play the? Yeah.
I was able to move my my 1
Okay.
o'clock meeting. So if you want to introduce more, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to get some help in this next section because we have Ada Hetko, who I'll talk about in a second, and also Zhenya Volach with us. Two of the people who are writing new Yiddish songs today as we sit here. They'll probably come up with a new one at the end of the session. So new Yiddish songs. Many years ago, when I was a teenager, the idea that there would be new Yiddish songs written was kind of an odd thing to most people. They sort of figured that with World War II and the Holocaust, everything that was going on creatively in Yiddish had happened already. And so anytime someone sang a Yiddish song, it was assumed that it had been written before World War II. I happened to grow up in a very small corner of that world, which was the Yiddish secularist educational tradition of the Shalom Aleichem Folk Institute, which had afternoon schools in Yiddish for kids through high school, and also a summer camp. And in this very small corner of the Jewish world, which is a small corner of the world, writing new Yiddish songs was the norm. So from the beginning of my participation in the Yiddish song world, I was in a kind of a very strange and small minority situation. And as I went through this educational system, I became the music counselor at this summer camp by Brick, and part of the job was to write new Yiddish songs every summer. So that's how I got into it. And by the way, this was a very productive part of the Yiddish song creation machine, because when we look back even at the history of this particular summer camp, we see people like Meyer Posner and Ilya Trilling I'm forgetting his name now, David Ellen, Hanem Lotik. These were all music counselors at Camp by Brick, and also Lazar Weiner was a music counselor at Camp by Brick. These are all very important or less important composers in the theater world, in the liturgical world of Yiddish song, and also worked in the educational system at this summer camp. If we look at the history, for example, of Bela Schechter Gottesman, one of the most important Yiddish songwriters of the 20th and a bit into the 21st century, it's a similar story. Bela began writing Yiddish songs because she was teaching in a shul. She was teaching and she had to make little presentations for the kids to give. So this is how I got into writing Yiddish songs. And it was a kind of a lonely pursuit for many years, because even the people who were interested in reviving klezmer music, for example, and I sang with Capella, one of the very early revivalist groups, there was no impetus, as there was at Camp Bleiberich, to write new material. It just wasn't. It wasn't a thing. As the klezmer revival movement and then revitalization movement went on, we began to turn a corner, and first began, I would say, with new arrangements of old material. So we took some old material and rearranged it musically, treated it differently. Then there was a development of setting existing texts to music. And one of the early examples that from my own history was taking poetry of Shike Driz, who published, there was a book that was published in 1965, Die Vierte Strune, the Fourth String. And my colleague from Camp Bleiberich, Fischl Kolko, one spring when we were preparing for the summer, sent me a text to a song. He said, "This is a perfect song for you to set." It was called Dem Zayten Sneegen, and it's a song about a melody. So it was a perfect candidate to be fed into that machine of writing new songs for the kids. As time has gone on, I began to write in the 1990s original texts, and that then became more widespread. We had people like Michael Alpert also writing new Yiddish songs with new texts rather than setting poetry, existing poetry. So that brings us right to the present day, because I'm going to present one of the songs that I wrote recently, but I would like to jump first to our two guests who very kindly appeared at this session. And why don't we start actually with Zhenya Volach, who will introduce the song that she wrote. Zhenya. Yes.
You hear me?
Yes.
Let's this is I'm a person who did not grow up speaking Yiddish at home, but inheriting a tradition of Yiddish from both sides of the family, and also inheriting I would say a cheshik to singen.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I would say that my grandmother, who was brought out of the pogroms of Odessa as an infant to London, and was strongly encouraged to study Yiddish by her chosen, who she met there when they were both working either behind a counter or actually on the streets of Petticoat Lane selling things as very young people. her cousin insisted that she learn Yiddish, presumably so she could speak with his parents and family, who in fact I don't think she ever probably got to meet, because they then emigrated to Medicine Hat. But she was a woman who was impossible to stop her from singing. And she didn't teach me Yiddish, but she taught me to cook. And when they said, stop singing in the synagogue and let the choir sing, you could not stop her. So that was I think the song, the singing comes from there. And I think the attraction to Yiddish folk culture comes from there, because she was a real folksmensch. I never got to meet my grandmother, but I knew my maternal grandmother very well. This song itself is a song that grows out of my desire to learn Yiddish, to my own Basherter, who is a klezmer violinist and music historian who may be known to some people here, and who is a very eminent person in the field in his own right, and nothing to do with me. He is the real musician of the family, and he's also the person who insisted on having a kala who was functional in Yiddish, so that the children could speak Yiddish in the home, which we have done. So, but the songwriting I started doing in English in high school, and I've used it to help me learn Yiddish, and both writing poetry and writing songs. And the song itself comes out of real fights that we are in New York today. It is in the tradition of the Yiddish protest song. It speaks to the inability of regular people on the ground to get through to the people up in the skyscrapers. This is just get. This
Okay.
Is that okay?
Good, all right, I'm going to share my screen so we can see and hear Zhenya's song. Share screen. Okay, here we go.
Wir sind die 99%, in mir stehen du bei der Tür. O größere Gidin, wo's herrscht in die Welt, gib darauf schon reden mit mir. Wir stehen du in Kälte und Schnee, verfroren die Füße in die Hände. Ihr sitzt du oben, ihr lacht und ihr fresst und sagt, es hat euch nicht. Ihr sitzt du oben, ihr lacht und ihr fresst und sagt, es hat euch nicht. Wir sind die 99%, wir stehen mehr nicht bei der Tür. O größe Ganoven, wo's herrschen die Welt, seid gesinnt, wo's Teuge Gewirr. Seid gesinnt, wo's Teuge Gewirr.
Okay. Thank you, Zhenya. That's. Did everyone understand, or should we get a very brief translation? Yes, a translation? Okay. Zhenya, could you just briefly give us a...
Well, briefly translate. I've been trying to make English words for the Yiddish, so English-speaking protesters can sing this too. But basically what it is saying is we're the 99%. We're standing by the door. Oh, you rich people who run the world, come down and talk to us already. We're standing here in the cold, in the snow. Our hands and feet are frozen. You're sitting up there, you're eating, you're guzzling, and you're saying, I don't care. We're the 99%. We're not standing by the door anymore. And all you thieves who run the world, goodbye. Who needs you anymore?
So there we go. Well, we'll maybe have some time for people's reactions to this, but for me, I would just say it's a beautiful example of a sentiment right out of our lives today that the Yiddish way of putting it, both musically and in the lyrics, are essential to the soul of the song. That's the way I feel it. We can talk about it later. And now let's jump to a different kind of song from Ada Hepko. And maybe, Ada, if you will unmute. Let's see.
Hi, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for having me. It's really neat to be included in this. This song is called Gott hat eine neue Nähmaschine. God has a new sewing machine. The successful songs that I've written so far in Yiddish have turned out to be songs about beautiful, like natural beauty. So that's what this is about. The lyrics are saying, spring is robed in bright green. I'm still workshopping this a little bit. Josh has been incredibly helpful with getting feedback on some pieces of this. So it might not, the lyrics might not change exactly this way. It might not stay exactly this way, but so far the lyrics are the spring, and spring is robed in bright green. The trees heavy with flowers. And God has a new sewing machine for sewing white clouds. Try-la-la-li-la-li. The boots wallow in dust and dirty the thresholds. No rainbow is coming soon because God isn't sowing rain. The duck is happy and will get happier. A rainbow is coming soon because God is sowing rain. So that's this song.
Okay. So I think I'll play the song in the version that you just gave us, and then maybe you can say a few words about songwriting and maybe the project, of collecting other songs and so forth. So let me get this up. Okay, now share. No, that's the wrong one. Hold on a second. Let me share.
Frühling tragt der lichte Grün, die Bäume. Frühling tragt der lichte Grün, die Bäume schwer mit Blumen. Und Gott hat eine Nähmaschine, bei nähen weiße Wolken. Die Stiefel, sie stäuben sich und einschmutzen die Schwellen. Kein Regenbogen kommt noch nicht, weil Gott nicht kein Regen. Die Katschke ist eine Freile,
Okay.
So I guess I'll say.
Okay. Okay. 1 second.
Go ahead. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Yeah. Okay. Did that work well? Was the sound clear for everyone? Okay. All right. So first of all, gorgeous song, and I know that I think that you have been also previously setting some of Sutskevo's nature poems, so kind of a run up to this one, and I mean, just for myself, this is a wonderful, in 2 short songs, presentation of different directions that Yiddish songwriting today is taking, and very traditional, sort of engaged political direction, and very connected with nature and yeah, and beauty. So, Ada, could you tell us also a little bit about the project that you're involved in of collecting, anthologizing the new songs that are being, some of the new songs that are being written today in Yiddish?
Yeah, so I'm involved with a project. Thank you so much, Josh. And I'm involved with a project called Oysters of Yiddish Song, where we're working to put together a collection of new Yiddish songs and put them into a songbook. And the title Oysters is both a reference to Pearls of Yiddish Song, Hannah and Yasomulatek's wonderful songbook, and a play on the Yiddish word oitzer, meaning a treasure or a treasury. And I am working on this project with Zoe Aqua, who's a wonderful klezmer instrumentalist, and Rosa Daniel Lang-Levitsky, who is also a songwriter, who I met in Josh and Daniel Kahn's new generation of Yiddish songwriting class, which has been an incredible anchor for me and really an inspiration to keep writing. So really grateful for that. The Oysters Project has been reaching out to composers that we know, and we'll also be putting out a call for submissions soon. And you can contact us at yidishoysters@gmail.com if you're curious to learn more.
Okay. So I'm going to, how are we doing on time? We're getting close. So I'm going to play one of the songs that I wrote recently, which is a kind of a companion piece to Zhenya's song. This is also a song about the 99%, and let me just get it up and play it for you, and then we can maybe get into the discussion part of our session. Just give me a moment here. Okay. Having a little bit of trouble here. Now. Okay. I'm having a little bit of trouble. I apologize in getting this one up. Is this true?
While Josh is doing that, let me just say, hope you noticed the difference in musical style between the 2 songs that we heard. Ada's writing in her, so to speak, native musical dialect, which is an American, kind of an American style, whereas Zhenya's song is more in an older maybe more Europeanized kind of style. Those are interesting things to look at. The evolution of the chosen vehicle, in a sense, or the chosen partner for a text, that would be a better word, is the partnership. And people come to those things intuitively, knowing what they know how to do and what their aesthetic is. So those are really major issues in trying to figure out something like the Yiddish song.
Yeah, I would like to add that Ada's style, which is a very, as you say, very American folk style, gives her an interesting opportunity to play with the way that Yiddish words are set in a style that's not out of the Yiddish folk tradition. And I think a very successful way of setting those words rhythmically, which is of course my, okay, let's see. Okay, now I've got this song up, so let me get the sharing going. And we'll have one more of the new Yiddish songs being written today. So where's the, here we go, share sound. Okay. Whoops. Is that, did someone have a, okay, here we go.
Wir treibt uns auch aus von Stadt, weil es Schieres ist der neue Gott. Schreiben Zeitungen herum die Themes, wie sie kennt das heutzutage noch sein. Teures lang verstehen wir dem Memes, als ein Schieres ist ein falscher Wein. Und man ruft dem Menschen ein Passkognac und man hält im Fach ein Bruch. Nur wie bald man verdient hat, bis so man macht in der Mäuscher noch. Und in oi, wie schön ist mein Maschine da drin. Seht wie es halt in Käppele die ganze Welt. 99, 99, 99 seinen wir. 99 in der Welt von eurem Hase kommt nicht zu ein Gewirr. 99 seinen wir. Fürs Fern an eucher Heint ist einmal 99 Freund. Denn super seid das Schönste und das Beste. So unser Leben ein bisschen eng und schmal. Du sag bei den Fundamenten feste. Kratzen wollten's mit dein Glas und Stahl. Als mit der Gruppen hat Post und Passkognac an der Kirche im dicker Steg. Soll schenken a schöne de Dove, wirst du werden an Tee. Hoi, wie klug ist unser Räucher Hund. Seht, wie weiß, wie euch so hell die ganze Welt. 99, 99, 99 seien wir. 91 ist der Räucher, 91 mit seiner Schieres aus der Schier. 99 seien wir. Das Rädelsrad rein und die Berge fällt besochene schreit der 1%ig Heidekaien, los die Zoren mit zum Kehren so. Beis mir was herzen wir Schereien, suchen ein Gedires, aber wo? Aber Chabern nicht kein Chaser sein, für das Leben mal Geschenk. Man macht nicht von einer Wohnung eine Kante, man macht nicht von einer Stadt eine Bank. 99 ist eine Chaberschaft, 91 ist eine Chaserschaft. 99, 99, 99 seien wir, 99, 99, nur wir 99 singen unser Schier. 99 seien wir, 99, 99, 99 seien wir, 99, 99, 99 seien wir.
Okay, so that's another 99% song.
Brilliant. So this is a great survey of what's happening right now. And as I say, it just keeps unfolding and snowballing through history. So I think, yeah, this would be the time to turn it over. People, you're going to, Lori, people just unmute and ask questions. Is that how we're doing it?
I think so.
Yeah. Lori? Oh, Lori, could you unmute for a second? Yeah, right. Well, Lori is going or something.
Oh, okay.
Well, if people will indicate if they want
There
to
we go.
say something, and then Mark can call them and they can unmute. If you
Okay.
can wave your hand or...
Well, I can't see everybody's hand so easily.
Okay, well, look,
Just jump in, you know, just unmute and jump in. It's fine with me here.
Jeannie, you had a question.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Yes,
Yeah.
because my very real interest is transcription. I'm sitting here at the bottom of Africa, as you know, I'm South African, and I transcribe a lot of traditional African music, traditional Hasidic nigunim, I transcribe, and I would be very interested in trying my hand at transcribing the annotated traditional Yiddish folk songs. So I'm available for that. Please, I would love to do that. And if anybody would like me to listen and take the oral tradition and then grab the song and try and notate it, I will do that with pleasure.
That is a great offer. I should say that transcription is a can of worms, if not a whole gross can, gross of cans of worms. There are basically two kinds of transcriptions, prescriptive and descriptive. A prescriptive one is what we mostly have for the Yiddish song, like the Moatek songbooks. This is how you should sing it. This is how it goes. It's not the way somebody...
Prescriptive.
Prescriptive is what, Charles Seeger's term, right? Whereas a descriptive one says, this is how that person sang it, which is extremely complicated, and you can go as far as you want in micro-analysis of how they do it and invent new notation systems that are not necessarily staff notation to do it. And that gets to be a deep or a thick description of what the song performance is about, which is a whole different, job to do. The problem, each one has its problems. Descriptive things can get like, you can't really read them because they're so complicated. And it's hard to just pick up and sing from a really good descriptive transcription. It's sometimes really hard to read. On the other hand, prescriptive ones just close down all kinds of possibilities. So people put in bar lines. You really don't want bar lines in folk songs because when you see a bar line, you say, oh, I have to accent it. So it's dot, 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 because that's where the bar line is. That's not how anybody sings. They sing in breaths. They sing in long lines. They sing in phrases. Yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, this is ethnomusicology, 101. We have whole courses traditionally in ethnomusicology about transcription because it's a nightmare for us trying to deal with the music of the world this way. Nevertheless, we badly need a lot more transcriptions. There's a big project going on right now, which we haven't mentioned because it's about instrumental music. There's a stash, a corpus, a hidden cache of 1,400 manuscript klezmer tunes that has just been spirited out of Kiev, out of the library that's been holding onto them forever. And there's a group project, crowdsourced, of people sitting trying to decipher the original manuscripts and trying to make modern notations for them. And it's a fascinating process. They're like doing it online together. And actually a group thing is really an interesting way to do transcription. In this case, it's extremely rare that this would happen. But because they're all fanatics for this music and want to have versions to play, they're doing it even as we speak. People are doing these transcriptions. Nobody's done that yet for the Ruth Rubin collection or the Stonehill collection, let's say, which are all sitting there online, like 3,000 songs that, yeah, I mean, it would be great to do them, but there'd have to be like somebody who says, or a group who sit and say, scratch there and say, what's the right way to transcribe a Yiddish song in 2021?
Right.
For what purpose and how should it work and how do we go about this project so that we don't end up with a bunch of things that are not going to have legs or not going to be, in a sense, meaningful. Yeah, sorry, Jean.
I'm very conscious of the pitfalls, and I've used very alternative notation for African music, as you can probably understand. Pulse notation and all sorts of other notations.
Yeah, massive problems. African music, wow. That's really tough.
It's a huge field.
Yeah, I think.
I'm going to suggest. Let me jump in and suggest that if we could recruit some people like yourself, Jean, who would volunteer to jump in, perhaps Mark at our next couple of meetings of our circle, we can kind of come up with a transcription system that will be usable, and then we can.
Well, that's going to take a while, but yes, I love it. I mean, the idea of having somebody who's actually skilled in doing this work is extremely unusual. For the Rubin anthology that I put out with Hannah Waldek, those transcriptions were done by Zalman, and they're meant to be singable and useful, and they don't all really reflect. If you look at Von Goist Assad in there compared to how we might write down Von Goist Assad, it's going to be really, really different. So I think this is a great initiative. I'm glad you have those kinds of skills, and I think, yes, we should find a way to tap into this sort of energy.
Thank you for...
I would love to listen. I'd love to have the material. And I'd love to see what sort of appropriate things one can come up with, because ultimately one really only has the melodic shape and structure. So in order to even put harmonies to it, that's another whole skill.
Well, we were not in the business of adding harmonies. That was done, that continues. But from our point of view, we want the unadorned, the unaccompanied Yiddish folk song is what we're doing. And people writing harmonies, that's perfectly legitimate, but it's another ballgame. So, But anyway, we'll talk about it more. To find it is easy. Just go to YIVO and you can listen to the entire Ruth Rubin archive. It's just sitting there. So thanks for that. Other questions? Agnes.
I jumped into the question from London.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Sai, for a wonderful talk. What is your recommendation when you teach Yiddish songs vis-a-vis pronunciation? Do you teach Litvish Yiddish pronunciation, or do you recommend freer practice?
Here's my take on that. I would say this: if you are a Yiddish speaker, then I would say sing the song in your dialect. If you're someone who has learned Yiddish, then I would say sing the song in the dialect that you were taught in, that you've learned. Because, let me give you an example. there's a song which my grandfather sang, which I remembered and now sing. It actually turns out to be a Goldfaden song, and my Yiddish is Klal Yiddish. I call myself a born Klal Yiddish speaker because that's the Yiddish that was spoken at the dinner table when I was growing up. And when I sing this song, which my grandfather sang in Galiciana Yiddish, I'm singing it in Klal Yiddish because I'm singing the meaning of the words. So, but there's one particular spot in the song that remains in my memory the way he sang it, because he loved that place in the song. And so I sing that little passage in Galiciana Yiddish, and I think, in other words, it's an organic, if you're singing the meaning of the words, which is the way it should be, then you're singing in your native dialect. All right. If you're kind of remembering and celebrating the way you heard it, which was in a different dialect, then you can slip into that dialect. I mean, we in other words, sing it the way that gives it the most meaning to you as you sing it. That's
good advice. Good advice. Agnes, Corey had a question, I think.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Okay, it's just this is to Mark. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned that, I think that's what you said. I'm not 100% sure that there aren't any Yiddish collections, and I think you gave some examples, and the first one was Budapest. So did you say, or have I misheard you? Did you say that there were no Yiddish?
No, I didn't say that at all. I said every so-called nation in Europe that studies its own folk music, and particularly the Hungarians are the great example because they've studied the hell out of their folk music because of Bartók and Kodály, maybe more than any other people ever have, and because they insist on their particularity, being Hungarians. In archives, you talk about how many linear feet of material are there that run down the shelf. It's not linear feet, it's how many rooms, for the Hungarian folk song. That has nothing to do with Yiddish. I'm just saying every other group who has a European folk song tradition has studied it and published many, many volumes about the structure, the analysis, how doing that kind of work by professionals who were paid by the state, particularly in the socialist years, to come up with material, with literature in Russia, in Lithuania, in anywhere you go. In Germany, there are gigantic archives of folk songs with, we don't have that, okay? We don't have that. We have a tiny amount of material from the universe that was Yiddish folk song, and we don't have a literature. I mean, I'm talking about a literature, secondary literature on the Yiddish folk song, not the archive of the songs themselves.
Okay. I misunderstood you, misheard you.
Sure.
So thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Charles. Yes.
Yes, Chicago. That's fantastic. So following on, since we're talking about dialects, I have a kasha about dialect, and I also have something for show and tell, which I will show you in a minute. So my kasha is Shalom Aleichem himself, born in Ukraine, and I just was thinking, how would he have said Tevye the Milchiker? Because I had a cousin called Toivia, came from Poland, and I know a lot of people from Belarus, and in Belarus they don't say Shana Toiva, they say Shana Teva, but I don't know what Ukrainian Yiddish is like, even though my shul is the Kiva shul, that all the people there are all born in New York anyway. But, so my kasha is, first of all, how would Shalom Aleichem have pronounced Tevye the Milchiker? And then after you're finished, I'll show you I have something to show you.
I don't actually know that Ukrainian Yiddish would say Tevye in any way but Tevye, but
I think
how would they say Shana Toiva in Ukrainian dialect? Do you say teva or do you say toiva or what do you say?
Not teva.
Not teva. Teva is a Litvish.
Teva is Litvish.
Yeah. Okay. So where did why does he have? Where did Tevye the milk get Tevye? What kind of a name is Tevye if someone from Poland says Toivia? I had a cousin Toivia. That's why.
Well, it's just you have regional dialect pronunciation. If every single word in Yiddish is pronounced differently in the different dialect.
Yeah, I'm curious about Ukrainians. Too bad I don't know too many
it's
Ukrainians.
Been analyzed. It's been analyzed to the nth degree by the great project called the Language and Culture Atlas of Ashkenazic Jewry, which was done through YIVO when there were speakers of every shtetl and dorf you could lay your hands on at that point, alive and available speaking their dialects. And they did it. They did questionnaires. They came up with exquisite maps and exquisite accounts of all the varieties of Yiddish and everywhere you want to go. So that's where we turn to really know. I mean, Yiddish dialectology is a big field, so we don't want to step into there. We're not engaged with that.
We just want to know
but
what Shalom
in
Aleichem.
terms of the singers, there's some question when Ruth Rubin transcribed, for example, when we were putting the book together, and I was sitting there with Chana Mlotek and Chava Lapin, and they were saying, Ruth made a mistake. They knew her very well. Ruth made a mistake here. I said, what do you mean made a mistake? They say, look at this. She has those words rhyme in her transcription of this, but I know that singer. In their dialect, they never would have done it that way. So we were like, well, do we keep it the way Ruth did it or do we change it? So these became like issues that could have gone on for days once you got into that dialectology with people like Chava and Chana, who really knew what they were talking about. So it's a Welt, mit Weltelach, dialectology. So, but the question is what to do about songs. And as Josh said, leave them alone. Leave them in their tradition. Leave them the way people sing them. Other questions?
I'm going
you want to show and tell, yeah.
You mentioned Michal Gnessin at the very beginning in 1926. I found in Seamus, and I framed it. If you can see what this is the
Naya Lida.
This is the cover, the actual cover of Naya Lida, and it's edited. It says Y Bakst and M Gnessin, and it's Naya Lida. And look at this. I only have the cover.
So that's Bakst. That's the artist. Bakst was an artist. Well, so that's his work. I have never seen that book, actually.
This is the cover. I haven't got the book.
Yeah, I have not seen
the cover. And it's this fantastic beautiful. An imitation. Beautiful. It's channeling Malevich.
It's not channeling. That was the period.
Yeah, but
that was Bakst. That was Bakst.
It's not Malevich, but he wishes it were. But it's a treasure. This is the actual cover.
Yeah,
and
terrific.
I found it in a box of Seamus in a shul somewhere. So I don't know whether it's. I thought you'd like to see this.
It's thank you. It's
beautiful.
Absolutely lovely. Do we still have time? Are there other questions? Geraldine, how are we doing?
Question. Yes, fine. Carry on.
Okay.
Can I just say that Charles said he would also volunteer for transcription.
Transcription. Okay.
Yeah. So call me.
Okay.
Call my agent.
Right. There is no money in any of this, of course, as you can imagine. Right?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Way back at the beginning of this presentation, you mentioned that you had at least one translation of an article written in Russian.
Yes, that's the Gnessin article. Yeah.
Are you planning to sponsor more translations of research on Yiddish folk songs in other Eastern European languages?
If you can find articles about the Yiddish folk song, not about other subjects that we don't know about, we would be very interested because, it's hard to find those things. I never heard of this thing at all remotely, except Izali, who knows everything Russian, knew about it. And it's a fascinating article and very technical in its way, but I had never heard of that. So of course, the more literature, the more, I can't promise they'll all get translated because that's a big project to do that.
Yeah, but I'll bet Zissel Slipovich could hook you up with some fairly good Russian language literature if any exists.
That's analytical approaches.
I don't know, but you should certainly.
Well, we're not interested in memoirs and all that kind of thing, which is great. But if anybody wrote other analytical articles, that would be really interesting.
Great
to know. Yeah.
I was wondering if and you might not know this, Mark, but if the Ruth Rubin and the other collections that like the ones that were done in the 70s, was there any breakout of the women who might have been singing quasi-religious or tchinas material, or did they only sing secular material?
Josh?
Janet Leuchter made a wonderful study of women's religious songs, and I would refer you to her because,
yeah, we're thinking of Janet is another addition to our repertoire of stuff on the website when it comes to. She did serious analysis of things.
Alex. Yeah.
Hi. We had a long tradition in the UK with a very well-known family called Selnicker. So Anna Selnicker and her father started Yiddish theatre, I presume at the turn of the 20th century. They produced their own plays, their own songs. I think it was a famous one was the King of Lampedusa Street, or Lampedusa, which ran and ran and ran. So I was wondering if you have any music from the English Yiddish theatre, which was very, very prominent in the East End of London from the 19th through to the 1950s, probably. Because I remember going to Yiddish theatre in the East End of London with my father. So it was still crowded. Hundreds and hundreds of people turned up, and all spoke, all speaking in Yiddish. So the music must be there, the notations must be there for these plays, and I'm just wondering who has them, and if the Selnicker family have these archived, and maybe can help you with your research as opposed to the American point of view, because every time I hear these programs, it's all about America Yiddish, America's Second Avenue, the American immigrants, the American composers, but it all started in Europe.
Well, surely you know Vivi Lox's book, I presume, Whitechapel Noise, which completely redresses the balance, completely compensates for that lack of information. It's a brilliant, comprehensive, intelligent book, and it really makes the case for what happened in London exactly in the period of immigration that we know so much about for New York. So I don't know if Vivi's here. I don't think I saw.
The family came to England.
Yeah, but that is a real contribution. Yeah. You said I'll have Whitechapel Noise. But yeah, sure.
Yeah, they came
Many
to
people
England. They produced play after play.
Yeah.
7 days a week. When Adler was the chief rabbi, he was very upset with them, and he threw them out of London because he was ashamed of these Yiddish players they wanted to assimilate, and the Yiddish players were spoiling it for them, so he shoved them off to Paris. So they went to Paris before they ended up on the Lower East Side of New York on 2nd Avenue, the Tomaszewskis and people of that era. And it's amazing how the non-Jewish world embraced the Yiddish theatre and the Yiddish theatre superstars, even when Broadway in the Depression was feeling the pinch. 2nd Avenue was still heaving with these full houses. Absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, well, my own grandfather came to London first before New York, and so did many Jews, but they found London uncomfortable in ways where they had relatives and they went on to America. It's a standard stepping stone. London is, but a lot of people stayed, and they made a wonderful culture. Any other questions before we run out of time?
Marcia?
Yeah, hi. Mark, thank you so much for this presentation. Mark, I wrote you.
Yes, I read. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. But I just wanted to actually express my coda again, because I think a lot of people perhaps on the conversations on Zoom who are regulars have sort of listened to this today, myself especially, with this feeling of tremendous regret that I was we were part of an era in America, at least, when Yiddish was so suppressed that my own parents, who spoke Yiddish fluently, just never wanted to teach us because it was a secret language, as it were. And I think that was a tremendous, a tremendous lacking, even though they thought they were doing the right thing, that it was, a language of the old world, or forget about that.
Yeah, no, it was extremely common those days. If you all haven't read Jeff Chandler's book, Yiddish Land, he really goes into that in wonderful detail. And he coined the term post-vernacular Yiddish for the kind of comedy and the way that Yiddish was used after the Holocaust, particularly in America and elsewhere, as a kind of circulation of stereotypes, of humor and many other things, that because it was no longer a vernacular, and part of it is what you're saying is it was suppressed as a vernacular, the way Jerome Robbins suppressed it in Fiddler on the Roof. It was that transitional generation. Okay, I mean, they had their choices to make, they had their decisions to make. You're not going to blame them for it, but they were living in their time, and that's what they thought. But yes, you're right. It's kind of too bad. And I know many people who grew up in those circumstances. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, Josh. Yeah. Josh.
Well, I just want to say that what's been very inspiring to me is living through that wave. And younger people today don't have the negative associations with Yiddish.
Exactly.
And I think that's why we get people like Ada Hetko and people of her generation who come to Yiddish without the negative stereotypes. And so, as we say, as man lebt, der lebt man.
Right.
If you live long enough, you get to...
just broadening out into, sort of the general literature. It wasn't until later in life that I came to a book about Yiddish, maybe 2 decades ago, that talked about the Chernovitz conference. I had no idea that there was a whole dispute about whether Yiddish or Hebrew should be the language of Israel.
Well, those were the days. There were so many million speakers that these things were live issues. And
Neil Schwartz, I see your hand is up. Let's see if we can squeeze in.
Thank you.
Okay, this is non-academic, a cute example of what this last conversation. Mom and Grandma, when we would visit Grandma, would talk in Yiddish, but I took German in high school, and all of a sudden I could understand them. A generation later, my kids went to a Jewish day school that was 30 miles away, and we had the Hebrew teachers, so we would carry them. She and I would talk in the car when it was my turn to drive. In 5th grade, the son who is now a principal in a Jewish synagogue, the education director, she and I are talking about something private, the way Mom and Grandma used to talk in Yiddish, and out of the back of the van comes a question in excellent Hebrew from a 5th grader about something that was none of his business. And I said, ay, 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 it's come full circle. As I did to my mom and grandma, my son is doing to myself and our Hebrew teacher, and I was very proud of him.
Maybe just need a secret language to talk in.
Right.
It's not going to be something else.
Right.
Well, that's a lovely moment. In the fourth thing, Josh and Mark Slobin, it's been a really inspiring presentation, and familiarize us again with this very rich material and bring it forth. It's been wonderful because we have people here who write Yiddish songs, and I see Maria here. Are you involved with this website, and are your songs going to be part of that? And would you like to say something? Maria Vigand.
Bruja.
Yeah. Can you unmute and say something, Bruja? Would you like to?
What shall I say?
Because you write Yiddish songs. Would you like to?
I don't write Yiddish songs. I'm a lecturer in Yiddish at the University of Oxford, and I'm also a Yiddish poet. And I've published 2 books of my own poetry in Yiddish with English translations published by the Hey Leivik Verlag in Tel Aviv. And some of these poems have been set to music by various singers and musicians, including Lenka Lichtenberg in Canada, Kol Ische in Berlin, Svetlana Kundish and Patrick Farrell, based in Berlin now, and a few others.
Okay,
that's great.
Let me just jump in. There, one whole stream of new Yiddish songs that we didn't include in our presentation is the art song, and because you mentioned Sveta Kundish and Patrick Farrell, who have been writing in that idiom. We also have Alex Weiser here in New York, who's been writing Yiddish art song. And many others too numerous to mention. I mean, it's a real part of the scene of what's happening now. So thank you for bringing that in, and some beautiful stuff.
No, yeah, absolutely. And we have to mention that in Yiddish, poets call their poems Lieder. So the word song in Yiddish is rather more complicated than in English because, W.H. Auden didn't write books of songs, whereas you are. I mean, a Lieder is the, standard title for books of poetry in Yiddish. So that's a problem, in a sense, but it's a cultural context that's very rich. The idea that a poem is in some sense a song, or that the words are synonymous is really, really interesting in the Yiddish tradition.
Yeah, very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. This has been a wonderful presentation.
Well, it's a pleasure for us to see all these people and all these, next time in London, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And Josh, it's just, the two of you together have made a wonderful conversation. And
right.
Thanks for the invitation. It was great to be able to get this international gallery of faces. Thank you all.
Can't wait for part 2. We need part 2.
If you come back next week, we're talking about their Spanish song.
Right.
So we have Isabel Gans with Vachshachat talking to us particularly about the original song and how it compares with modern interpretations and arrangements of the song. So we'll be looking at both field recordings and modern recordings. And after that, Yehoash Hirschberg and Irit Youngerman are talking about the beginning of music in the state of Palestine at that time, beginnings of musical life there. And on the 2nd of March, we have a panel of cantors talking about preparation for Passover in a pandemic. How do we make spiritually connected Jewish music and worship? So,
good stuff.
Thank you all.
Okay. Seid mir alle gesund und stark, and hope everybody stays well.
And thank you
very much to Laurie for managing us and looking after us. And to Mark in California, to Martha, who is in Dresden, who's part of this structure. And we're really very happy to have you all along with us and look forward to you coming next week. If you haven't joined the forum, you can go to the website of Humanities Commons and join the Jewish music group. And then you'll be sure to be told what's happening all the time and connected. The whole point of the International Forum for Jewish Music Studies is to connect us so that we know what everybody else is doing in an easy way. So Thank you, Josh and Mark, again, very, very much. And look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thanks, Laurie.
Okay. Bye-bye.